The scream that tore from Katherine Anne's throat died somewhere between her bedroom window and the dirt road below, swallowed by the thick August heat that pressed down on Redding, California like a suffocating blanket in the summer of 1878. She pressed her palm against the glass, watching Judge Horatio Blackthorne's carriage roll through the gates of her father's estate, and felt the corset around her ribs tighten until breathing became a calculated effort. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Blackthorne, bound to a man whose courtroom sentences were as merciless as his private temperament, and the 22 years of life she had lived would evaporate into nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered among the younger women of Sacramento County. Katherine's father, Edmund Anne, had made his fortune in lumber, carving wealth from the towering pines that surrounded Redding until his name carried weight in every saloon, every trading post, every church pew for 50 miles. But fortunes, Katherine had learned, were fragile things, and when her father's gambling debts had mounted to figures that made grown men pale, Judge Blackthorne had appeared like a circling vulture, offering a solution wrapped in the respectability of marriage. Katherine's consent had never been requested, only assumed, as if she were another parcel of land to be traded when the ledgers didn't balance. She had met the judge exactly 4 times before her father announced the engagement. Horatio Blackthorne was 53 years old, with silver hair that might have been distinguished if not for the cold calculation in his gray eyes. During their second meeting, she had watched him sentence a young Mexican farmer to hang for stealing a horse that later turned up in the judge's own stable. During their third meeting, he had grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave bruises when she had tried to excuse herself from dinner early. Her father had seen the marks and said nothing. Her mother had been dead for 6 years, carried off by cholera, and Katherine suspected her mother's spirit had been merciful in its timing, sparing her the sight of her daughter being sold like livestock. The sun was setting now, painting the sky the color of dried blood. Katherine turned from the window and surveyed her room, taking inventory of the life she was about to lose. The books her mother had given her, the watercolor paintings she had made of the Sacramento River, the simple cotton dresses she preferred over the elaborate silks her father now insisted she wear. Tomorrow, she would don a white dress that cost more than most families in Redding earned in a year, and she would speak vows that would trap her in a gilded cage until death, which, given the judge's reputation, might come sooner than later. A pebble struck her window with a sharp crack. Katherine froze, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. Another pebble hit the glass, more insistent this time. She crossed to the window and peered down into the gathering darkness. A figure stood in the shadows beneath the old oak tree, barely visible in the fading light. The figure raised a hand, beckoning. Katherine's breath caught. She recognized the stance, the broad shoulders, the way he stood with his weight slightly shifted to his left leg, favoring an old injury from a horse that had thrown him 2 years ago. Owen Xavier, the cowboy who worked the northern section of her father's land, managing the small herd of cattle that her father kept more for appearance than profit. She had first seen Owen 3 years ago when he had ridden up to the main house looking for work. He had been 23 then, weathered by sun and hard living, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of whiskey in lamplight. Her father had hired him on the spot, needing someone willing to work for low wages and not ask questions about the books. Katherine had thought nothing of it until 6 months later when she had ridden out to the northern pasture and found Owen knee-deep in the creek, trying to free a calf trapped in the mud. He had looked up at her, squinting against the sun, and said, "You going to help or just sit there looking pretty?" No one had ever spoken to her like that. not with disrespect, but with a casual equality that assumed she was capable of more than needlepoint and piano lessons. She had dismounted and waded into the creek in her riding dress, and together they had pulled the calf free. Afterward, sitting on the creek bank with her dress ruined and her hair falling out of its pins, Owen had offered her his canteen and told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to a Comanche raid when he was 14, about drifting north through territories and towns until he ended up in California looking for something he couldn't quite name. They had talked until the sun set, and Katherine had ridden home feeling like she had discovered a door in a wall she had never known existed. After that, she found excuses to ride out to the northern pasture. Owen never seemed surprised to see her. They would talk while he worked, or sometimes they would sit in comfortable silence while the cattle grazed and the mountains rose purple in the distance. He taught her to rope, to read tracks in the dust, to listen to the language of wind through grass. She taught him, without meaning to, that there were women in the world who could think and dream beyond the boundaries men set for them. The day her father announced her engagement to Judge Blackthorne, Katherine had ridden out to tell Owen. She had found him mending fence, and when she told him, he had driven the post so hard into the ground that it split the wood. He hadn't looked at her for a long moment, and when he finally did, his expression had been carefully blank. "You want this?" he had asked. "What I want doesn't matter," she had said. Owen had thrown down his hammer. "That's a coward's answer, Kate." She had never told him he could call her Kate, but hearing it had made something in her chest crack open. "What am I supposed to do? Run away? Live in poverty? Shame my father?" "You're supposed to live," Owen had said, his voice rough. "Really live, not just exist in some bastard's house, waiting for him to kill your spirit or worse." They hadn't spoken since that day 3 weeks ago. Katherine had stopped riding out to the northern pasture, and Owen had stopped coming to the main house even for supplies. But now he was here, throwing pebbles at her window the night before her wedding, and Katherine's hands were shaking as she pushed open the window sash. "What are you doing?" She hissed down at him. "Come down," Owen said. His voice carried clearly in the still evening air. "I need to talk to you. I cannot. My father has guards watching the house. The wedding is tomorrow." "I know when the damn wedding is, Kate. That's why I'm here." "Come down, or I'm coming up, and I don't much care if your father's guards see me." There was something in his voice, a desperate edge that made Katherine's decision before her mind had fully formed it. "Wait," she said. "Give me 5 minutes." She pulled a shawl over her evening dress and slipped out of her room, moving silently through the dark hallway. The house was quiet, her father having retired early to his study with his brandy and his ledgers. The guards were posted at the front entrance and along the main drive, more for show than actual security. Katherine slipped out through the kitchen door and circled around through the garden until she reached the oak tree. Owen stepped out of the shadows, and even in the darkness, she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. He wore his work clothes, dusty denim and a faded shirt, and his gun belt hung low on his hips. A bay horse stood tied to a tree branch behind him, saddled and ready. "You look like you are about to rob a bank," Katherine said, trying for lightness and failing. "I'm about to do something stupider," Owen said. He took a step closer, close enough that she could smell leather and sage and the clean sweat of honest work. "Come with me." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and dangerous, and exactly what Katherine had been desperate to hear for 3 weeks. "Come with you where?" she whispered. "Anywhere. Everywhere. I've got money saved. Not much, but enough to get us to Oregon, maybe Montana. I can find work. I'm good with horses, good with cattle. We can start over where no one knows your father or that judge." "Owen, that is insane. My father would hunt us down." Judge Blackthorne would use every resource, every lawman in the territory. They would find us, and when they did, I'd deal with it," Owen interrupted. "Kate, listen to me. I've been trying to convince myself for 3 weeks that I should let you go, that you made your choice and I should respect it. But I can't. I can't stand by and watch you marry that monster. I've seen how he looks at you, like you are something he owns, something he can break. And I know what people say about his first wife, how she died under suspicious circumstances. I won't let that happen to you." Catherine's breath was coming fast now, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. "You would be throwing away your life. For what? For me." Owen reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his palms rough and warm against her skin. "Kate, there isn't anything in this life worth more than you. I realized that about 2 years ago, sitting by that creek watching you laugh at something stupid I said. I've been half in love with you since then, and full in love with you since the day you told me about your engagement and I saw how scared you were. So yes, I'm throwing away my life, but I'm gambling that I might get a better one with you in it." Tears were streaming down Catherine's face now, hot and fast. "I am terrified," she whispered. "So am I," Owen said, "but I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you." Katherine thought of the white dress hanging in her wardrobe, the gold ring Judge Blackthorne had presented to her father, the life sentence disguised as a marriage certificate. She thought of her father's disappointment, the scandal, the way her name would be dragged through every newspaper in California. Then she thought of Owen's hands teaching her to rope, his voice telling her stories by the creek, the way he looked at her like she was a whole person, not just a pretty ornament or a commodity to be traded. "I need to get some things," she said. "Give me 10 minutes." Owen's face transformed, hope and relief and something deeper flooding his features. "I'll be here." Katherine ran back to the house, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She slipped back through the kitchen door and up to her room, moving quickly but methodically. She changed out of her evening dress into her riding clothes, the split skirt and practical blouse she wore for her trips to the northern pasture. She grabbed her mother's jewelry from the drawer where she kept it hidden, the few pieces her father hadn't sold off to cover his debts. It wasn't much, but it might buy them time if they needed it. She packed a small bag with essentials, an extra dress, undergarments, her mother's Bible with its family records. On her writing desk lay the vows she was supposed to recite tomorrow, written out in her careful script. Katherine picked up the pen and turned the paper over. On the back she wrote quickly, "Father, I am sorry, but I cannot marry Judge Blackthorne. I am choosing my own life. Do not try to find me. Katherine." She left the note on her pillow and took one last look around the room that had been her sanctuary and her prison. Then she picked up her bag and left, closing the door softly behind her. Owen was pacing beneath the oak tree when she returned, his horse stamping nervously. When he saw her with the bag, the reality of what they were about to do seemed to hit him all at once. "Once we leave, there is no coming back," he said. "You understand that?" "I understand," Katherine said. "Help me mount." Owen lifted her onto his horse, then swung up behind her, settling her securely in front of him. His arms came around her to take the reins, and Katherine leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart against her spine. "Hold on tight," Owen murmured against her ear. Then he touched his heels to the horse's flanks, and they were moving, cantering through the darkness away from the lights of her father's estate. The guards would be changing shifts soon, and in the confusion of the transition, no one would notice 2 riders heading north into the tree line. By the time her father discovered her missing in the morning, they would have hours of head start. They rode hard for the first 2 hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Reading. The moon rose full and bright, turning the landscape silver and strange. Owen guided the horse off the main road and onto narrow trails that wound through the pine forests, paths that only someone who knew this country intimately would recognize. Katherine held the saddle horn and tried to process what she had just done, the magnitude of the choice that couldn't be taken back. Every few minutes, a wave of panic would wash over her, followed immediately by a fierce, wild joy that made her want to laugh and cry simultaneously. They stopped near dawn at a creek that ran cold and clear down from the mountains. Owen helped Katherine dismount, and her legs nearly buckled from the long ride. He caught her elbow, steadying her. "We will rest here for an hour," he said. "Let the horse drink and graze. We need to pace ourselves." Katherine nodded, too exhausted and overwhelmed to speak. She walked to the creek and splashed cold water on her face, trying to clear her head. Behind her, she heard Owen unsaddling the horse, the familiar sounds of leather and metal. When she turned back, he was laying out a bedroll under a cluster of pines. "You should sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch." "Owen," Katherine said. She didn't know how to finish the sentence, didn't know how to express the chaos of emotions rioting through her. He crossed to her in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I know," he said. "I know, Kate. It is all right. We will figure it out." She buried her face in his shirt and let herself shake, let herself feel the terror and relief and desperate hope all at once. Owen's hand moved in slow circles on her back, and gradually Katherine's breathing steadied. She pulled back enough to look up at him, and in the gray dawn light she could see every line of his face, the worry and determination and love there. "I should be sorry," she said. "I should regret this. But I do not." Owen smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Good, because I sure as hell do not." He kissed her then, softly at first, then with growing urgency, and Katherine kissed him back with 3 years of restrained feeling pouring through her. His hands came up to cradle her face, and hers gripped his shirt, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. The taste of him, the solid reality of him, the promise of something better than the life she had left behind. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "We should move slow," he said. "Do this right. I know we are running and things are complicated, but Kate, I want you to know this is not just about saving you. This is about building something real together." "I know," Katherine said. "I trust you, Owen. I have trusted you since that day with the calf in the creek." They rested for an hour, Katherine dozing fitfully against Owen's shoulder while he kept watch. When the sun rose fully, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they mounted up again and continued north. Owen's plan was to head toward the Oregon border, staying off main roads and away from towns where word of Katherine's disappearance might have spread. They would travel as brother and sister, or cousins, anything to avoid suspicion until they were far enough away to risk using their real names. The first 3 days passed in a blur of riding and brief rests, sleeping rough under the stars, eating hardtack and jerky from Owen's saddlebags. Katherine's body ached from the unaccustomed exertion, but she didn't complain. She had chosen this, and she would see it through. Owen was constantly vigilant, scanning the horizon for riders, listening for sounds of pursuit. But the land remained empty and quiet, stretching vast and indifferent around them. On the 4th day, they encountered their first real obstacle. They had stopped at a small trading post to buy supplies, and the man behind the counter, a grizzled old-timer with suspicious eyes, kept glancing at Katherine while Owen counted out coins for flour and coffee. "You two married?" the old man asked suddenly. Owen didn't miss a beat. "Engaged." Heading north to meet my family before the wedding. Uh-huh. The old man's gaze lingered on Catherine's face. You look familiar, miss. You from around these parts. Catherine's heart hammered, but she kept her expression calm. I have one of those faces, she said lightly. People always think they know me. The old man grunted, clearly unconvinced, but he took Owen's money and handed over the supplies. As they were leaving, Katherine heard him mutter something about checking with the marshal in the next town. Outside, Owen quickly secured the supplies to the horse and helped Katherine mount. We need to move fast, he said quietly. If he talks, word will spread. Your father has probably put out notices by now, maybe offered a reward. They rode hard for the rest of the day, veering west toward the coast instead of continuing north. The terrain grew rougher, the forests thicker. That night, camped in a small clearing, Owen sat with his rifle across his knees, staring into the darkness. Maybe this was a mistake, he said suddenly. Maybe I should have thought this through better, had a real plan instead of just running. Katherine, who had been trying to sleep, sat up and moved to sit beside him. Do you regret taking me? God, no, Owen said immediately. But I regret not being able to give you something better than running and hiding. You deserve a real life, Kate, a home, safety. I had safety in my father's house, Katherine said. I also had a future of misery. Owen, I would rather spend my life running with you than spend a single day in comfort with that judge. Do you understand? You did not take something from me. You gave me a choice. Owen looked at her for a long moment, then reached out and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. When we get clear of this, when we are far enough away that no one is looking anymore, I want to marry you properly. Not some desperate elopement, but real vows in front of whoever will stand witness. I want to do right by you. You already are, Katherine said. She leaned her head on his shoulder and felt him relax slightly, some of the tension easing from his frame. They sat like that for a while, listening to the night sounds of the forest, the horse cropping grass nearby, the distant cry of an owl. Tell me about Texas, Katherine said. Tell me about what you remember before everything went bad. So Owen told her, his voice low and steady in the darkness. He told her about his mother's garden, the way she could coax flowers from the hardest soil. He told her about his father teaching him to ride, to shoot, to read the weather in the clouds. He told her about the ranch they had built from nothing, the pride in his father's face when they had finally gotten the herd to 100 head. And he told her about the day the Comanche came, the day he had been out checking fence lines and had come home to find everything destroyed, everyone gone. He had been 14, and he had grown up hard and fast in the years that followed, drifting from ranch to ranch, learning to survive without putting down roots because roots could be torn up, and people you loved could be taken away. I stopped letting myself care about much, Owen said. It was easier that way. And then you showed up in that creek, covered in mud, and you looked at me like I was a person worth knowing, not just a pair of hands to work cattle. And I realized I had been half dead for 9 years, just going through motions. You woke something up in me, Kate. Something I thought was gone for good. Katherine felt tears on her cheeks again, but this time they were not from fear or grief. You did the same for me, she whispered. I thought my life was already written, every page predetermined. You showed me I could tear up the script and write my own story. Owen turned and kissed her, soft and lingering, and Katherine felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that no matter what came next, this was right. They were right. They spent another week traveling west and then north again, winding through small mountain towns where no one asked too many questions. Owen found work where he could, a few days here and there breaking horses or helping with cattle drives, earning enough coin to keep them fed and moving. Katherine learned to set up camp, to cook over an open fire, to read the sky for rain. She had never worked with her hands like this, never felt so physically exhausted at the end of each day, and she had never been happier. 3 weeks after they left Redding, they arrived in a small town called Ashton, Oregon, nestled in a valley between forested mountains. It was far enough from California that Owen thought they might be safe, at least for a while. They took a room at a modest boarding house, signing the register as Mr. and Mrs. Xavier, and the lie felt less like a lie than a promise waiting to be fulfilled. That first night in a real bed, with a roof over their heads and a door that locked, Katherine stood at the window looking out at the unfamiliar streets while Owen sat on the edge of the bed, watching her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Katherine turned to face him. "I am thinking that 3 weeks ago, I was preparing to marry a man I despised, and now I am here with you, and it feels like I have lived an entire lifetime in between. I am thinking that I should write to my father, let him know I am alive and well, even if I cannot tell him where I am. And I am thinking that I want you to kiss me and not stop, because we are finally somewhere safe, and I am tired of being afraid." Owen stood and crossed to her, his eyes dark with want and something deeper. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Kate, I meant what I said about doing this right. I do not want you to think I brought you here just for this." "I know why you brought me here," Katherine said. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "And I know what I want. I want you, Owen, all of you. I want to stop running and start living." Owen kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Katherine kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of 3 years and 3 weeks. They moved together toward the bed, shedding layers of clothing and inhibition, and when Owen laid her down on the clean sheets and looked at her with reverence and desire, Katherine felt truly seen for the first time in her life. What followed was tender and urgent and imperfectly perfect, 2 people learning each other, claiming each other, making promises with their bodies that their words had already spoken. Afterward, lying tangled together in the lamplight, Owen traced lazy patterns on Katherine's shoulder and said, "I love you, Kate. I should have said it before now, but I love you more than I thought I could love anything." "I love you too," Katherine said. "I think I have loved you since that first day in the creek, but I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time since they had left Redding, Katherine slept without nightmares of the judge or her father or men with guns coming to drag her back. In the morning, they went to find the town pastor, a kindly older man named Reverend Matthews, who listened to their story, a carefully edited version that left out the betrothal to the judge and focused on 2 young people in love who wanted to start their lives together. The Reverend agreed to marry them that afternoon, with his wife and the local school teacher standing as witnesses. Katherine wore a simple blue dress she bought from the general store, and Owen borrowed a proper jacket from the Reverend's son. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt, conducted in the small whitewashed church that smelled of pine and candle wax. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Owen kissed Katherine with such joy that even the stoic schoolteacher smiled. They signed the marriage certificate with their real names, Owen Callahan Xavier and Katherine Margaret Ann Xavier. And Katherine felt the legal weight of it, the protection and commitment it represented. That night, celebrating in their modest room with a bottle of wine the Reverend's wife had gifted them, Owen raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said. "To choosing our own path," Katherine added. They drank and kissed, and made love again with the freedom of being truly, legally bound to each other. Katherine felt the last remnants of her old life falling away, and in their place, a future she was building with her own hands alongside the man she loved. The next few months in Ashton passed in a haze of domestic happiness. Owen found steady work at her ranch 10 miles outside of town, and Katherine took a job at the general store, helping with inventory and customers. It was honest work, and though they had little money, they had each other. They rented a small cabin at the edge of town, one room with a loft and a stone fireplace, and Katherine made it home with curtains sewn from flour sacks and wildflowers in jam jars. But the shadow of the past could not be outrun forever. 4 months after they arrived in Ashton, a stranger rode into town asking questions. He was a Pinkerton agent, hired by Judge Blackthorne to find his missing bride. The man was methodical and thorough, showing Katherine's photograph to every shopkeeper, every resident. It was only a matter of time before someone recognized her. Owen heard about the Pinkerton from his boss at the ranch and came home early, his face grim. "We need to leave," he said without preamble. "Tonight." Katherine felt the familiar spike of fear, but also a weary frustration. "How long can we keep running?" she asked. "How long until we can just live our lives without looking over our shoulders?" "I do not know," Owen said honestly. "But I know we cannot stay here. If that agent finds us, the judge will have every legal right to drag you back to California. You are his betrothed in the eyes of the law, and our marriage might not hold up if he challenges it." "I am your wife," Katherine said fiercely. "That is the only law that matters to me." "It matters to me too," Owen said. "But it might not matter to a judge, especially one who has Judge Blackthorne's influence. Kate, please. We leave tonight, head further north, maybe into Washington territory. We can disappear again." So they packed their meager belongings and left Ashton under cover of darkness, abandoning the little cabin that had been the closest thing to a home they had known. They rode north through rain and cold, the autumn weather turning harsh as they climbed into higher elevations. Katherine felt something in her break, a weariness that went bone deep. She had thought they were finally safe, finally able to stop running, and now they were fugitives again, chased by a man's vindictive pride and her father's cowardice. They made it to a small logging town in Washington territory called Cascade Falls and found work at a sawmill. Owen worked the lumber yard, and Katherine cooked for the mill workers. It was hard, exhausting labor, and the town was rough, full of men who drank too much and fought too often. But no one asked questions, and no one cared who they had been before they arrived. For 6 months, they lived in a cramped room above the mill cookhouse, saving every penny they could, dreaming of buying their own land somewhere, a place they could put down roots without fear. Then one bitterly cold morning in February, Katherine woke feeling violently ill. She barely made it to the basin before she was sick, and Owen, alarmed, wanted to fetch the doctor. Katherine stopped him, realization dawning. She had missed her monthly courses twice now, and her body felt different, tender and strange. "I think I might be pregnant," she said quietly. Owen stared at her, shock and joy and fear chasing across his face. "Are you certain?" "No, but I think so." "Owen, we cannot bring a child into this life, always running, always afraid. We have to find a way to stop." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "We will," he promised. "I swear to you, Kate, we will figure this out. I will not let our child grow up the way we have been living." The doctor confirmed Katherine's pregnancy a week later. She was nearly 3 months along, which meant the baby would come in late summer. Owen became even more protective, insisting Katherine stop working at the cookhouse, taking on extra shifts to make up for the lost income. At night, lying in their narrow bed, he would rest his hand on her belly and talk about the future, the life they would build for their child. "I want to give you a real home," he said one night. "Land of our own, a house with more than one room. I want our child to grow up with security, with a future that is not defined by our mistakes or my past." "Our child will have us," Katherine said. "That is more than many children have. And Owen, you have not made mistakes. You saved me. Everything since then has been about survival." But the question remained, how long could they survive this way? The answer came from an unexpected source. In March, a man named Samuel Crowe rode into Cascade Falls. He was a U.S. Marshal, but unlike the lawmen they had been avoiding, Crowe was investigating Judge Horatio Blackthorne, not searching for Katherine. Over the past year, evidence had emerged connecting the judge to multiple illegal activities: bribery, falsifying court documents, and most damning, the suspicious death of his first wife, which was now being re-examined as a possible murder. The federal government was building a case, and they needed witnesses willing to testify about the judge's character and actions. When Marshal Crowe learned that Katherine Anne, the judge's missing betrothed, was in Cascade Falls, he sought them out. Owen nearly punched the man when he showed up at their door, but Crowe held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I am not here to drag Mrs. Xavier back to California," he said, using Katherine's married name deliberately. "I am here to ask for her help in putting a corrupt judge behind bars where he belongs." Over the course of several hours, Marshal Crowe explained the case against Judge Blackthorne. Multiple women had come forward with stories of abuse and coercion. The judge's financial records showed payments that could not be accounted for, suggesting bribery and corruption. And the judge's first wife, who had allegedly died in a fall down the stairs, had injuries inconsistent with that explanation. If they could get enough testimony, they could bring formal charges and remove Blackthorne from the bench permanently. "What do you need from me?" Katherine asked. "Your testimony about his character, his treatment of you, anything he might have said or done that suggests criminal behavior. And I need you to be willing to go back to California for the trial." Owen stood abruptly. "Absolutely not. You want her to walk back into the lion's den, stand up in court and testify against a man who has the power to destroy her. What happens when he uses his influence to discredit her or worse?" "Judge Blackthorne's influence is not what it used to be," Marshal Crowe said. "The more we dig, the more we find. He has made enemies in high places, and those enemies are eager to see him fall. Mrs. Xavier would not be alone in this." Katherine looked at Owen, then back at the marshal. "If I testify, if we help you put him away, will we be free? Will he no longer have any legal claim to me or power over our lives? If Judge Blackthorne is convicted, he will spend the rest of his life in prison," Marshal Crowe said. "And yes, you would be free of him completely. More than that, your marriage to Mr. Xavier would be uncontested, and your father would have no grounds to challenge it." Katherine felt Owen's hand find hers, squeezing tightly. She thought about their child growing inside her, the future they wanted to build. She thought about all the women the judge had hurt, all the people he had destroyed with his corruption and cruelty. And she thought about what it would mean to finally stop running, to stand and fight. "I will do it," she said. "I will testify." Owen started to protest, but Katherine turned to him. "We cannot run forever," she said, "and I will not raise our child in fear. If there is a chance to end this, we have to take it." Owen's jaw was tight, but he nodded slowly. "Then I am coming with you, every step of the way." They traveled back to California in April, accompanied by Marshal Crowe and 2 deputies. The journey felt surreal, retracing the path they had fled down nearly a year ago. When they reached Sacramento, where the trial would be held, Katherine felt her courage waver. The courthouse loomed large and imposing, and inside those walls, Judge Blackthorne would be waiting. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Katherine testified on the 2nd week, sitting in the witness box with Owen in the gallery, his presence an anchor keeping her steady. She told the court about the judge's temper, the bruises he had left on her wrist, the coldness in his eyes. She told them about her father's desperation and the judge's predatory offer. And she told them about the fear that had driven her to run the night before her wedding, the bone-deep certainty that staying would mean her death, if not of body, then of spirit. The defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she was a spoiled girl who had abandoned her duty to her family, that her elopement with Owen was proof of loose morals and unreliable character. But Katherine held firm, and when Owen was called to testify about the judge's reputation among the working men of Reading, his honest, straightforward testimony carried weight. Other witnesses followed. Women who had suffered at the judge's hands, court clerks who had seen documents altered, financial experts who traced money trails leading to the judge's accounts. By the third week, the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on multiple charges: corruption, bribery, and second-degree murder in the death of the judge's first wife. Judge Horatio Blackthorne was sentenced to life in prison. As the bailiffs led him away, he turned and looked directly at Katherine, his gray eyes full of cold rage. But there was nothing he could do. His power was broken, and Katherine was free. Outside the courthouse, Katherine's father was waiting. Edmund Anne looked older, diminished, the weight of his actions etched into the lines of his face. When he saw Katherine, he took a step forward, then stopped, uncertain. "Katherine," he said, "I owe you an apology, more than an apology. I was a coward, and I nearly destroyed your life to save my own pride and fortune." Katherine looked at the man who had raised her, who had loved her in his limited way, but had been willing to sacrifice her for his mistakes. She felt Owen's hand on her lower back, a silent support. "You did destroy my life," Katherine said quietly, "the one I had. But you also forced me to build a new one, a better one. I do not know if I can forgive you, Father, but I hope someday I might." Edmund nodded, tears in his eyes. "That is more than I deserve. Your mother would be ashamed of me." "She would," Katherine agreed. "But she would also want me to be happy, and I am. This is my husband, Owen Xavier. We are building a life together, and soon we will have a child. You can be part of that life if you choose to be, but on our terms, not yours." Edmund looked at Owen, really looked at him for the first time, and seemed to see past the dusty cowboy clothes to the man beneath. "Will you take care of her?" he asked. "I will spend every day of my life doing exactly that," Owen said. "And loving her and respecting her choices and never treating her like a possession to be traded away." The criticism in Owen's words was clear, and Edmund flinched but nodded. "I deserved that." He turned back to Katherine. "May I write to you, wherever you settle?" "Yes," Katherine said. "You may write." They left Sacramento the next day, riding north once more, but this time without fear, without constantly looking over their shoulders. Marshal Crowe had given them the reward money offered for information leading to the judge's conviction, a sum large enough to buy land and build a real homestead. They traveled back through Oregon and into Washington Territory, searching for the right place, the place that would become theirs. They found it in May, in a valley east of the Cascade Mountains where the land opened up into rolling grasslands bordered by pine forests. There was a creek running through the property, clear and cold, and the soil was good for farming. Owen stood looking out over the land, and Katherine saw the way his expression softened, the way the constant tension he had carried for a year finally eased. "This is it," he said. "This is where we build our life." They bought the land, 200 acres, and spent the summer building a cabin. Owen did most of the heavy work, but Katherine helped where she could, her pregnant belly growing as the cabin's walls rose. Neighbors from the nearby town of Ellensburg came to help with the raising, good people who asked few questions and offered friendship freely. By late July they had a home. 2 rooms with a loft, a stone fireplace, glass windows that Katherine had insisted on, and a front porch that looked out over their land. On August 15, 1879, Katherine went into labor. The local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Donovan, attended her while Owen paced outside, alternately praying and cursing, helpless in the face of his wife's pain. The labor lasted 14 hours, and when it was finally over, Mrs. Donovan emerged holding a squalling infant wrapped in a clean blanket. "It is a boy," she announced. "Healthy lungs on him, and a good strong heartbeat." Owen stumbled into the bedroom where Katherine lay exhausted but smiling, the baby now nestled in her arms. Owen knelt beside the bed, staring in wonder at the tiny face, the miniature fingers that wrapped reflexively around his thumb. "He is perfect," Owen whispered. "Kate, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Katherine asked. Owen thought for a moment, then said, "Thomas, after my father." "Thomas Edmund Xavier," Katherine nodded. "Thomas, I like that. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world." The first year of Thomas's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful exhaustion. Owen expanded their cabin, adding a second bedroom, and started building a barn. He bought cattle, a dozen head to start, and began establishing his herd. Katherine planted a garden, coaxing vegetables from the soil the way Owen's mother had once coaxed flowers. They worked from sunrise to sunset, building their homestead into something sustainable and profitable. In the evenings, after Thomas was asleep, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, and Katherine would lean against Owen's shoulder and feel the bone-deep satisfaction of a life lived on their own terms. Occasionally, letters would arrive from her father, tentative at first, then gradually warmer as Edmund tried to rebuild the bridge he had burned. Katherine wrote back, sharing news of Thomas, of the ranch, of the life she had built. Forgiveness came slowly, but it came. 2 years after Thomas was born, Katherine became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. Their daughter arrived on a spring morning in 1882, delivered so quickly that Owen barely had time to fetch Mrs. Donovan. They named her Rose Margaret Xavier, after Katherine's mother. With 2 children and a growing ranch, life became more complex but no less fulfilling. Owen hired a ranch hand, a young man named Peter who had drifted west looking for work and stayed for the honest wages and fair treatment. The herd grew to 50 head, then 100. Katherine started selling eggs and butter in Ellensburg, building relationships with the town merchants. They were no longer running, no longer afraid. They were ranchers, respected members of their community, parents raising children who would never know what it meant to live in fear. When Thomas was 5 and Rose was 3, Katherine's father made the journey to Washington Territory to meet his grandchildren. Edmund Anne was an old man by then, his fortune rebuilt through legitimate means, his gambling days behind him. He spent 2 weeks at the ranch, and Katherine watched him interact with Owen, 2 men who had once been on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide, now finding common ground in their love for Katherine and the children. One evening, sitting on the porch while the children played in the yard, Edmund said, "I have spent years regretting what I nearly did to you, Katherine. But seeing you here, seeing the life you have built, I realize that perhaps it all happened the way it was supposed to. Not that I deserve to be forgiven for my role in it, but that you were strong enough to take the worst situation and transform it into something beautiful." "I had help," Katherine said, glancing at Owen, who was teaching Thomas to rope a fence post. "I could not have done any of this alone." "No," Edmund agreed. But you were brave enough to take the first step, to leave behind everything you knew for the chance at something better. That takes a strength I did not possess when I was your age. Your mother would be so proud of you. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. I hope so, she said softly. I think of her often, especially when I am with Rose. I wish she could have known her grandchildren. She knows, Edmund said. Wherever she is, she knows, and she is proud. When Edmund left to return to California, he embraced Katherine tightly and shook Owen's hand with genuine warmth. Take care of each other, he said. That is all that really matters in this life. The years continued to pass, each one building on the foundation they had laid. Thomas grew into a serious boy with his father's steady temperament and his mother's sharp mind. Rose was wild and joyful, fearless in a way that sometimes terrified Katherine but also filled her with pride. In 1885, Katherine gave birth to twin boys, James and Samuel, and the house was suddenly full of noise and chaos and laughter. Owen built additions to the cabin, until it was hardly recognizable as the modest structure they had started with. It sprawled now with 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, a room Katherine used for sewing and painting. The ranch prospered, the herd growing to several hundred head. They hired more hands, built more structures, became one of the established ranches in the valley. But despite the success, Owen and Katherine never forgot where they had started, never lost the gratitude for the life they had chosen. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Owen surprised Katherine with a gift. He had commissioned a painter from Seattle to create a portrait of the family. They all dressed in their finest clothes and sat for the painting in front of the cabin, the mountains rising behind them. When the portrait was finished, Owen hung it above the fireplace, a permanent record of what they had built together. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was finally quiet, Katherine and Owen sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. The stars were bright overhead, the air smelled of pine and sage, and the sound of cattle lowing in the distance was as familiar as breathing. "You ever regret it?" Katherine asked. "Stealing me away that night?" Owen turned to her, his weathered face creasing in a smile. "Not for a single second. Do you regret running?" "Never," Katherine said. "That was the night my real life began. Everything before was just preparation, and everything after has been the reward." Owen took her hand, his thumb tracing the simple gold band he had placed there 10 years ago. "I love you, Kate, more now than I did then, if that is even possible. You took a gamble on a cowboy with nothing to offer but his heart, and you built an empire with me." "We built an empire," Katherine corrected. "Together. That is the only way anything worthwhile is built." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen, knowing that tomorrow would bring the usual challenges of ranch life, children, and all the small dramas of daily existence. But they would face it together, as they had faced everything since that August night in 1878, when Owen Xavier threw pebbles at a window and Katherine Anne chose freedom over fear, love over obligation, and her own path over the one that had been chosen for her. As the years continued to unfold, their children grew into capable adults. Thomas took over more of the ranch operations, showing an instinct for cattle management that made Owen swell with pride. Rose married a schoolteacher from Ellensburg and moved into town, though she visited the ranch frequently with her own growing family. The twins, James and Samuel, proved to be natural horsemen and started a side business breeding and training horses that became renowned throughout the territory. Katherine watched her children build their own lives and felt a deep satisfaction. They had grown up secure, loved, free to choose their own paths. They had never known the suffocating expectations that had defined her youth, never experienced the terror of being trapped with no way out. That was her and Owen's gift to them, the freedom to become whoever they were meant to be. In 1895, when Katherine was 39 and Owen was 42, Washington became a state, and they attended the celebrations in Olympia, proud to be part of this new chapter in the region's history. Their ranch was now one of the most successful in the state, and Owen's reputation as a fair employer and savvy rancher had spread widely. Young men sought work at the Xavier Ranch, knowing they would be treated with respect and paid honest wages. Katherine had become known in her own right, not just as Owen's wife, but as a woman of substance. She had started a lending library in Ellensburg, donated to the local school, and served on committees that improved life in their community. When women in Washington gained the right to vote, Katherine was first in line at the polls, casting her ballot with tears of joy streaming down her face. Owen stood beside her, having waited to vote until she had exercised her hard-won right. As they aged, their love deepened into something that transcended the passionate urgency of their youth. They moved together with the easy synchronicity of two people who had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs side by side. They could communicate with a glance, finish each other's sentences, anticipate each other's needs without speaking. They had become, in the truest sense, partners. One evening in the summer of 1900, Owen and Katherine sat on the porch of their ranch house, now surrounded by grandchildren playing in the yard. Thomas's children, Rose's children, and the first of James's children filled the space with laughter and shouts. Katherine was 54 now, her hair streaked with silver, her hands marked by years of work. Owen was 57, his hair mostly gray, his body still strong but bearing the wear of decades of physical labor. "Look at what we made," Owen said, gesturing to the children, the house, the land stretching out before them. "Not bad for a desperate cowboy and a runaway bride." Katherine laughed, the sound still bright after all these years. "Not bad at all. Do you remember how terrified we were?" "Every day," Owen said. "But I also remember thinking that even if it all went wrong, even if we only had a few days together before they caught us, it would have been worth it. Turns out we got a lifetime instead." "And what a lifetime it has been," Katherine said. She reached over and took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the practiced ease of 40 years together. "Thank you, Owen, for being brave enough to throw those pebbles at my window, for giving me a choice when I thought I had none." "Thank you for coming down," Owen said. "For trusting me enough to run, for building this life with me." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, their grandchildren's laughter floating on the evening air. They had started with nothing but love and determination, and they had built an empire of a different kind. Not of wealth or power, but of family, community, and a love that had endured every test. The judge who had tried to claim Katherine was long dead in prison. Her father had passed peacefully in his sleep 5 years ago, and all the people who had stood between them and happiness were gone or irrelevant. What remained was this: two people who had chosen each other when the world had chosen differently for them, and who had spent every day since proving that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is follow your heart, even when logic and society and fear say otherwise. Their story had started with a midnight escape and a desperate gamble, but it had become a testament to the transforming power of love, courage, and the unwavering belief that your life is yours to claim, yours to live, yours to build into something magnificent. As the stars began to appear overhead, Owen pulled Katherine closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder the way she had done 1,000 times before. "Tomorrow," Their children and grandchildren would leave, returning to their own homes and lives, and the ranch would settle back into its daily rhythm. But tonight, they were surrounded by the legacy of that single brave choice made on an August night in 1878, and it was more than either of them had dared to dream possible. They had stolen away into the night seeking freedom, and they had found forever. That was the true happy ending, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of enduring love, and the satisfaction of a life lived fully, freely, and absolutely on their own terms.